Hi everyone! This video is the second part of our three-part series covering some interesting and influential people in southern Hopkins County. Today we're going to be talking about some important figures in the history of Barnsley, Earlington, and Mortons Gap. We're starting our exploration today in the small community of Barnsley. One early influential gentleman here was a man named William Walton. William Walton was born in Barnsley, Yorkshire, England on June 9, 1842. Walton grew up around coal mining. He even lost his father and brother in mining accidents in England. As a teen or young adult, Walton decided to come to the United States. He first settled in Newburgh, Indiana, where he was involved in a bad mining accident where he lost one eye completely and lost the eyelid on his left eye, leaving him unable to blink. Following the accident, he returned home to England for a time, where his mother nursed him back to health and helped him find protective goggles to wear. He wore these goggles for the rest of his life. Walton did not allow these setbacks to hold him back, however, and he soon returned to the United States, this time settling in Hopkins County, Kentucky. Here, with the help of a few other men, he funded the opening of a new coal mine at a location first named Walton City, after its founder, but which was later renamed Barnsley, after Walton's hometown in northern England. He opened a store called Walton's Bitters in 1877, and at one point also owned a saloon. He was also one of the first postmasters in the new community. For most of his adult life, William Walton lived in Barnsley or Earlington. He married Amelika Catherine Burton in July 1872, and the pair soon had two sons, William and Thomas. They later adopted a third son named Oscar. Following the death of his first wife, he married Margaret Landtrip in 1886, and the couple had a son named Bernard. In March 1882, Walton took a trip around the world, which was a remarkable feat at the time. His plan was to visit as many capitals in the world as possible, earn a day's wage in each capital, and unfurl the American flag at each place at some point. He expected not to spend more than $1,500 on his trip. Walton started his adventure by taking a train from Earlington to San Francisco, and then take a ship to Japan. He arrived at San Francisco with only $100 for a ticket, which wasn't enough to pay the full passage to Japan. So Walton, who was also an accomplished musician, agreed to play organ and concertina aboard the ship to help pay his way. Upon returning home to Hopkins County in 1883, Walton created a journal about his travels that stayed in his family for many years. He called this book Walton's Rambles Around the World Without Winking. In this journal, he conveyed his adventures and misadventures in various countries, and seemed particularly impacted by his time in Jerusalem. Here he was awed by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and drove nails into the Wailing Wall for two of his Jewish friends in Hopkins County. This is a picture of William Walton in Japan. Pictured is the American flag that was given to him in Earlington before his departure. Again, in every city that he visited, he made sure to bring out this American flag at least once. The Japanese flag in the photo was a gift to Walton from the American minister of Japan. The American minister also gave him a special pass from the Japanese emperor to visit the empress's private park. Upon returning home, he put on a little show at the Hopkins County Fairgrounds in 1890 to show some of his souvenirs, specimens, and the American flag he brought home from his big trip. The souvenirs included wood samples from Jerusalem, ancient and modern coins from many different countries, and rare fossils. In 1892, it was reported in local newspapers that he was off on another adventure, this time to explore Europe. After having quite an adventurous and eventful life, William Walton died on July 7, 1903, at the age of 61. He was buried at Earlington's Oakwood Cemetery. Now we move on to Earlington and one of its early influential people. John Bayliss Earl was born on January 23, 1823, Sam B., and Jane Woodson Earl. In the late 1860s, Earl was a foreman on one of the railroad construction crews building the first railroad through Earlington. It's alleged that in the course of building the railroad, Earl struck a hillside and found a large, rich vein of coal near where the modern town sits. In 1869, Earl opened the first commercial underground coal mine in Hopkins County. Earl's mine was short-lived, but the vein became the number 11 mine for the St. Bernard Coal Company. John Bayless Earl was one of the original stockholders for the St. Bernard Coal Company. The mine was located on the northern side of the Hunting Branch, about 3,000 feet east of the old Madisonville-Earlington Road. John Bayless Earl married Sarah Wolfwork on October 1, 1849, and the couple had at least 5 children. Due to the distinction of having founded the first mine, the town of Earlington was named in honor of John Bayless Earl. John Bayless Earl died at his home in Madisonville on July 8, 1906, and was buried at Oddfellows Cemetery. Upon his death, the Earlington Bee described Earl as always living a, quote, quiet, useful life, never heralding his acts, but friends who knew him best knew that he was a very charitable man and never failed to extend a helping hand to the poor or oppressed, end quote. It also described Earl as a self-taught, self-made man that became a successful lawyer and financier later in life. Another man who had a huge impact on the town of Earlington was John Bon Atkinson. Atkinson came to Hopkins County from Boston in the early 1870s. Born in 1840 to a respected Quaker family in southern New Jersey, Atkinson quickly rose through the ranks of trusted and important mining engineers in the Northeast, and in April 1871 was designated as the second president of the St. Bernard Coal Company, which would have 3 big mines in southern Hopkins County, including ones at St. Charles, Mortons Gap, and Earlington. Atkinson, it could be argued, had more influence on the St. Bernard Coal Company in early Earlington than any other person. While some at the time would argue that Atkinson's hold and influence on the town was too strong, bordering on authoritarian, many also highly respected him. And again, he really seemed to care about the town and wanted it to be a success. At a time when many outside investors and executives lived far from the center of industry, Atkinson and his family built a home in downtown Earlington and remained hands-on in the community. He pushed to have the town succeed, often at times putting his own profits and fortune on the line. He also pushed the company to provide land and buildings for schools and houses of worship in the towns where they had mines. And, not typical for the time, he also insisted that black schools and churches be built for the African American mining families. He also gave funds to build Atkinson College in Madisonville, which was a higher education experience for African American youths. Overall, he seemed to want to better his workers, both mentally and spiritually, and provide better citizens for the town, the county, and the country. Throughout the course of his time at the St. Bernard Coal Company, Atkinson built 2 company stores, an opera house, an electric generation plant, banks, the public schools, again both black and white, a parochial school, and numerous churches. Under Atkinson's leadership, the St. Bernard Coal Company also paid cash, not scrip, to their employees, which allowed the employees more freedom with their paychecks, and they weren't beholden to the company's store. The company even offered low-cost medical care and unlimited credits for medicines to their employees. Again, at the time, this was extraordinary. Atkinson also funded and built an arboretum, filled with both native and imported trees to teach the importance of conservation. He also stocked the area with imported quail for hunters to enjoy. Atkinson created the first farm experiment station in the state of Kentucky as well, and over the years was an important and vocal advocate for Western Kentucky coal at both Frankfort at legislative hearings and at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. John Bon Atkinson married his first wife, Sarah Ann Black, on May 23, 1867. The couple had 2 children, John, born in 1868, and Mary, born in 1869. Sadly, both Mary and John died in early adulthood. In November of 1900, his wife Sarah also died fairly young. On September 16, 1903, Atkinson remarried. His second wife was Anna Newbold Black, and the couple went on to have a daughter, Anna, who they called Nan. The photographs you see here were taken circa 1892 in and around Earlington, and featured John B. Atkinson, his brother George, and other members of the Atkinson family. Both the lake, built in 1886, and Lakeside Park in Earlington were created by the St. Bernard Coal Company at the request of Mr. Atkinson. Loch Mary Lake was named after Atkinson's daughter, Mary Atkinson Moore, who died in 1907. The lily pads in the lake were planted by Atkinson for Mary as well. Atkinson also kept the lake well stocked with a variety of fish for sportsmen. Families also ice skated on the lake in the winter, when weather permitted. The photo here, entitled Loch Mary, is a part of a collection John B. Atkinson sent to railroad executive Milton Smith around 1892. The lady in the rowboat is likely either Atkinson's first wife, Sarah, or his daughter, Mary. This photo, therefore, could literally be Mary on Loch Mary. If so, this is the only photograph we could find of Mary Atkinson, who would have been 23 at the time the photo was taken. The second Earlington School was built in 1903 by John B. Atkinson after fire destroyed the first building at the same location. Atkinson and the school board had this modern brick building built to teach generations of Earlington students. Atkinson passed away from lymphatic leukemia at his summer home in New Jersey on September 22, 1911. This Earlington School was renamed John B. Atkinson Memorial School to honor his life and contributions to the town. Now we move on to Mortons Gap, whose namesake was Thomas Morton. Thomas Morton was one of the earliest settlers in Hopkins County. Morton was born in Virginia in 1764. Around 1790, at age 26, Morton married Elizabeth Davis in Clark County, Virginia. In March 1797, Thomas and Elizabeth Morton arrived at modern-day Mortons Gap with their first 3 children, William, Samuel, and Richard, and began building a new life on the wild frontier. The family initially built a small wooden cabin, but later built a nice, sturdier brick structure in 1804. According to the 1807 Hopkins County tax roll, Morton owned 347 acres, 9 enslaved persons, and 5 horses at this location. The Morton family prospered and began the Morton settlement that would later become known as Mortons Gap. The 9 Morton children born in Hopkins County were Nancy, Priscilla, Thomas, George Washington, Addison, Henry, Olive, Joseph, and Elizabeth. By the time that Thomas Morton died, the family had sold most of the 347 acres and only had a remaining 123 acres. Thomas Morton died on May 8, 1844, and was buried on the Morton property in a small family cemetery, which still partially exists today. His 6th son, Henry H. Morton, inherited the family home, but sold most of the remaining acreage to the growing town, only keeping 5 acres around where the original home stood for himself. Thomas Morton's son, Samuel Morton, became a well-known and influential citizen of Hopkins County. Samuel Morton, born in 1794, became a Justice of the Peace, County Magistrate, and represented our area in the Kentucky legislature. He later would be elected sheriff in 1850, and later became a county judge here in Hopkins County, where he served from 1856 until his death in 1865. Samuel's son, John G. Morton, would go on to become postmaster at Madisonville, as well as a constable and deputy sheriff. After the Civil War, John went into trade in tobacco and later became a well-known banker. He also continued to farm. John G. owned 2,500 acres and 8 farms, which were worked by 20 to 30 farmhands. He became one of the wealthiest citizens in Hopkins County and bought and renovated a grand home on 140 South Main Street in Madisonville. This home still exists today. He married and had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters, and his daughter Elizabeth Morton married John B. Atkinson's grandson, John A. B. Moore. This is a photo of the original brick Morton homestead in Mortons Gap, as it appeared in the 1920s. This brick structure was built by the Morton family in 1804 after their original log cabin had been destroyed by fire. The Morton home was likely built by Thomas Morton himself with help from his older sons and slave labor. It was the first brick home ever built in Hopkins County. The bricks for the home were fired at the location. It was a 2-level structure with 2 rooms on each level, and 7 of the 12 Morton children were born in this brick home. In 1811, the home was damaged by the massive New Madrid earthquake, but it continued to stand with only minor cracks around a few of the windows. Minus the cracks from the earthquake, the house was well maintained and stayed in excellent shape for many, many years. The home was added to over the years as the family needed space, but these new additions were wooden structures instead of brick. As you look at this photo of the home, notice the different colored bricks. Unlike the bricks of today, these bricks were homemade on site, so the colors would be irregular, ranging from light yellow hues to deep red colors. In the early 1930s, the city of Mortons Gap decided that the Morton home location would be the perfect spot for their new school. So in 1936, the city bought the location from the Kelly family. On September 16, 1936, the Morton home caught fire and was completely destroyed. So, this first brick home in the county was built in 1804 and survived until September 1936. This remarkable pioneer homestead home stood for a total of 132 years. Another influential person in Mortons Gap came into town much later than the Morton family, but still had a dramatic impact. William Ward Kington was born near Barnsley in 1861. At the age of 5, Kington and his 2 younger siblings were abandoned by their parents, Susan and George W. Kington, when the couple divorced. The Kington children were raised by their maternal grandparents, Thomas and Louisa O'Brien. The O'Briens lived just east of Mortons Gap. Ward never got over the loss of his parents and never forgave his mother for leaving him. Kington apparently wasn't as bitter about his father's departure. Reportedly, George W. Kington left to seek new fortunes out west, and he said that he would return and retrieve his 3 children. Years later, Ward Kington would search for his father, but the elder Kington was never seen or heard from again. By the early age of 12, Ward Kington was working in the St. Bernard Company's South Diamond Mine near Mortons Gap. Throughout his teens and early adulthood, he worked nearly every possible job at the mine and learned every skill of the trade. In 1901, after saving some money, when Kington was around 40 years old, he branched out and started the Kington Wolf Mine. This mine was located on the west side of modern US 41, near the southern city limits of Mortons Gap. The Kington Wolf Mine operated from 1901 to 1906. In 1907, Kington made his boldest move yet when he opened his expansive and impressive mining operation at White City. White City, located on an area formerly known as Moss Hill, was developed on land around 4 miles from Mortons Gap. In addition to the mine itself, an entire community soon developed at the location. At its height, White City had 3 stores, a church, a hotel, and over 100 houses. It also had a large corral stable for mules and horses. It housed and employed around 350 men and their families in the mines and at the town itself. White City thrived for many years and is fondly remembered by those that live there, including the late Kenneth Haywood of Nortonville. Years later, Haywood remembered living in the small house at White City with his father, and that the town had 2 sections, White City with buildings painted white, and Red Town with buildings painted a barn-colored red. He also remembered walking to Lakeside General Baptist Church in White City, and walking between the giant ever-burning gob piles. The smelling, smoldering piles reminded him of why he should always go to church and keep away from the devil. And while owning the White City mines, Ward Kington stayed heavily involved with the town of Mortons Gap. He helped organize and was president of Mortons Gap's Planters Bank in 1907 and built a local ice plant. He was also president of the Mortons Gap Ice and Light Company in 1914. Kington also reportedly built the main brick business block on Main and Main Cross Streets in Mortons Gap in 1904. He also bought and donated land and helped fund the building of the town's Baptist church. He also served on the town's city council for 23 years. In February 1883, William Ward Kington married Emma Louisa Lovin. The couple would go on to have 8 children, 5 girls and 3 boys. The picture here shows the Kingtons' home on Crooked Street in Mortons Gap. His wife Emma likely died at this location in 1914 at age 48. The high point in Kington's career occurred in 1920, when he sold the White City mine to Brent Hart for around $500,000. This was the largest business deal ever in Hopkins County up to that point. Unfortunately, Kington would not get to enjoy much of his wealth. He experienced a great deal of financial hardship after remarrying and then soon divorcing a widow named Minnie Mox Spivey. And he also lost a large amount of money in the Florida land bust of 1925. His final years, however, seemed to be fairly happy ones. He remarried, this time to a lady named Bernie Walker, and although no longer extremely wealthy, he died a financially secure man. William Ward Kington wore many hats during his 83 years. He was a farmer, miner, carpenter, bricklayer, brickmaker, undertaker, baker, banker, merchant, canning factory worker, father, husband, and philanthropist. He was a true Renaissance man, constantly reinventing himself and pushing himself and his family forward into prosperity. He died on May 25, 1944, and was buried at Old Salem Cemetery. Well, that's it for today's video. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you're enjoying this series. Please join us next time for our third and final chapter, where we discuss important and influential folks from the communities of Oak Hill, St. Charles, and White Plains. We'll see you then.